Global Indian Network. Print, TV, events, podcasts. Find out more at globalindianseries.com. Hi, my name is Divya. Before you get to today's show, I've got a quick favour to ask. If you've been enjoying our conversations, I'd love if you could take just 1 minute to leave us a review on the platform that you're listening to us on and share our work to friends and family. It helps us out a lot. Word of mouth is the primary way that we grow. Thanks for your continued support.
Yeah, we met last summer, and obviously as two world travelers that love to tell stories, we hit it off really well and kicked off, I think, a great friendship that I wish we could spend more time together. So it's great that you're here and we can continue conversation. On November 8th of last year, I was diagnosed with 4-stage prostate cancer that was very aggressive. I had a month or so before that, I was told I had prostate cancer, which a lot of men get. I mean, statistically, about half of men in the U.S. will die either with or from prostate cancer. So it's very common. But to have a metastatic prostate cancer where it's gone outside of your prostate, it's far more difficult to treat and certainly far more life-threatening. So that's what was such a shock for me, to sit there in a doctor's office and basically be told that if this is untreated, you have about 5 years to live. And I still remember hearing that from him, and it was kind of like when a shell hits in a movie and it explodes, and all of a sudden the characters can't hear anything, and you just hear this ringing, and they're wandering around, and that's kind of what I felt in the doctor's office. Fortunately, my wife was there taking notes, because I just felt kind of shocked. And then as he started talking about the potential therapies in traditional medicine, that was even harder to hear. So that started us immediately on a quest of trying to decide what type of treatment path. My wife's been a health and wellness coach for about 25 years. We ate really well already. We exercised, and there was a big part of me that was like, how could I get this? Yeah. I mean, my dad had it, but he was overweight and he didn't take really good care of himself. My uncle had it, and pretty much the same thing. But goodness, I hardly ate any sugar. We ate really clean, and we exercised quite regularly and drank clean, purified water, all of that. So yeah, it was perplexing to think, well, what have I done wrong? Why do I have this disease? Of course, in traditional medicine, they feel it's either genetics or just kind of bad luck, because often you don't really know, or it can't be proven scientifically how, but they can look at when a woman has a BRCA gene, that you have a propensity toward breast cancer. And same way with any hormonal cancer, breast cancer, or prostate. So yeah, that started us on a quest of trying to understand what was behind it, because when you have cancer, your body is trying to tell you something is wrong. And in traditional medicine, they just try to cover that over with a drug. Yeah. So we're going to give you what's called androgen deprivation therapy. We're going to shut your testosterone off, because for men, testosterone feeds cancer and tumor growth. So we'll just turn that off. Well, there's no sense in traditional medicine that we're going to look at what caused the cancer. We're just going to look at treating what's there. And as we started to learn, and we started listening to podcasts, reading books, anything that we could consume related to cancer, and starting to understand that 95% of all funds invested in cancer is for treatment, not prevention or cure. So that pretty much tells everything. 95% wow. of funds spent on cancer research is for treatment. And the bottom line of that, and you can look at this cynically or however, but that's where the money is in the treatment. It's hard to make money and it goes against a business model to prevent a disease that your drug will cure. Yeah. So the system itself somewhat prevents a cure, and there's over 200 types of cancers. So the idea that there's going to be one cure, there won't be one cure, because there's so many different types of cancers in our body. And what happens with traditional therapies is you treat it in one way. We were at a wedding on Saturday, and this guy's on his third different type of cancer. Traditional treatments. It went from liver to throat to prostate. And am I running down? I'm running down a rabbit trail here because there's just so much information, so much that we've learned. But traditional medicine, basically deals with the symptoms, not the base cause.
Yeah.
And so that was really a key focus then of our journey is what's behind this? What's causing this?
Yeah.
And so we can work at a healing journey. And we tried to stay away, and I was encouraged to do this from other people, stay away from the language of I'm fighting cancer to looking at I'm healing my body.
Why is that important?
Because cancer is our body. It's got our DNA. It's our cells. So to create this adversarial, they say what you resist persists. So rather than going into cancer healing journey in this adversarial relationship with your body that I got to kill what's inside of me, and that's what traditional medicine is going to kill it. We're going to kill that. We're going to nuke it, with radiation or cut it out. What can we do to nurture your body to heal itself and see your cancer more like the prodigal son that's part of you that left and went bad and it needs healing, it needs help. And as my vegan friend said, when I first was diagnosed, within a week, a friend of mine owns a vegan restaurant and smoothie shop, and he's about as quirky and weird. He's really more of a fruitarian, but he would consider himself vegan. He eats like 12 bananas a day. So he's literally bananas. But he sat me down and he said, David, love will heal you. Yes, you're going to be eating food and supplements, therapies. I don't know what you're going to all be doing, but he said the bottom line is you need to know that love will heal you. As you love yourself, as you let other people love you, and he said as you let your food love you, you're going to find healing. And that was a real mark moment early on, is to recognize that love will heal me. And also someone asked the question, well, Dave, why do you want to live? Do you want to live? And it was kind of an odd question. Well, of course I do. But it forced me to think, okay, well, why do I want, maybe I want to die in 5 years. Some people might think, well, I'm kind of tired of life. I'll punch out in 5 years. But for me, I want to live into my 90s. I have a friend that's 92, and he's an associate producer on one of our films. I want to be like that. So it was another opportunity to look at my life. And so what's my purpose? Why am I here? What do I want to do? Why do I want to invest so much time and money to heal? And that was an important early on internal conversation. And my wife and I talked quite a bit about that. What is it? What's our purpose? What do we want to pursue? Especially as storytellers, what types of stories? And I feel like as a filmmaker, there's been an increased clarity about the stories that I want to tell and where I want to invest my time. So we did treatments here locally at a holistic clinic. I went raw vegan, which is really difficult, trying to find foods that you like and everything just being raw, like raw, uncooked mushroom soup, that just looked like poop in a bowl. And started vitamin C, intravenous vitamin C, which there's been a lot of anecdotal studies here in the U.S. But you go to Germany and vitamin C, for 30, 40 years, they've been administering that. That's just standard of care because virtually all of their cancer clinics in Germany are integrated. So you can get chemo or you can get vitamin C or ozone or acupuncture. I mean, it's all under one roof. A model, and in our film, we're creating a film about my story. We hope to be able to go to Germany. We know of someone that's gone there and went to a clinic. So we'd like to tell that story because we feel like people in America, well, in the Western world in general, need to understand that there's things outside of the box. And in the last 20 years, with the proliferation of information available in social media, YouTube, Facebook, part of the positive aspects, I could certainly talk about the negative aspects, but some of the positive is information is getting out unlike it ever has before.
Absolutely.
It's kind of like the Gutenberg press in the end of the 15th century, where that fanned the flames of the Reformation, because information would get out unlike it ever had before. And we're seeing that now. And I think in a very positive way, that's influencing healthcare, which is really sickness care right now, because you go to the doctor when you're sick.
Yeah.
You don't go typically for them to teach you how to stay well by the food you eat, your lifestyle, stress management, those other types of things. So in that course of time, in December after the diagnosis, I was doing local treatments, and we decided to go to a clinic in Mexico. Mexico has far fewer regulations than they do here in the United States. So you can go to a clinic that's really on the cutting edge of trying new therapies. And since most everything they're doing, or virtually everything they're doing, is non-toxic, it's not like you're trying an experimental drug that's going to kill you. While we were there, the head of the organization who started it, Dr. Jimenez, had just come back from Japan, and he had been meeting with 3 doctors there. They just published a book. They had done about 10 years of research with hydrooxygen therapy with prostate cancer victims, or those with, I hate to use the word victim. I don't ever want to see myself as a victim of this disease. I've been diagnosed with it, and I'm on a healing journey. In fact, someone, rather than saying, how are you doing? Saying I'm okay, saying, well, I'm healing. I kind of like that.
Yeah.
That I'm on a journey towards something good. So they were already talking about that. And then I went for a follow-up 3 months later. They already had the machine and were implementing it. Now, in a medical system here in the United States, that would have taken 10 years.
Yeah.
Just like it took 25 years from in the 19th century when the sea captain discovered that his crew that had scurvy, if they ate lemons, they didn't get sick. But the medical community balked at that, and it took 25 years before the medical community would say, okay, I guess it would be as simple as just eating something rather than drugs and therapies and other types of things. And I feel like that's what we kind of see going on now. I think as barbaric as we think of like bloodletting is, which was cutting edge, in the 18th century with George Washington, our founder of our country, the first president. They were bloodletting, thinking that was going to help him when he was sick. And I think chemotherapy at some point will be perceived that way. It's a new therapy. It started right after World War II, and it has made a difference, and it's helped people, but then there's a lot of dubious aspects toward it. Especially the way we administer it here in the U.S. We just like megadose. You go to other countries like Germany, you'd go to that clinic, well, they would use chemo along with high-dose vitamin C because chemotherapy destroys your immune system. Yeah. It dumps, you have this tremendous oxidative stress put on your body, and the vitamin C can help with that. But here in the States, they'll dump you with a megadose, but give you nothing else. And most people aren't getting much vitamin C from their diet anyway. And so these types of treatments are really harmful to people. So part of it was to try something that was completely non-toxic. We were encouraged by a professor at a local cancer center here who's written a book about approaching cancer from a non-toxic immune enhancement. And he's really on the outside of his peers because they're very much in the traditional core care. He's been doing research for years, and he's a professor of nuclear technology where he teaches radiology. So he's been thinking outside of the box. He wrote this book. In fact, we've asked him to be in our documentary, and he said, well, when is it going to be released? And I said, well, probably sometime in 2024. He said, well, good, I'll be retired by then. Because he said, seriously, because even my book, I couldn't publish where I worked or anything related to the cancer center because for fear I might lose my job. Yeah. And there's, that happens a lot in oncology, that, these guys are making $300,000 or $400,000 a year. To jeopardize that with recommending something that's not within the allopathic traditional medical realm they can lose their reputation.
It feels that your frustration's not with cancer, but the mechanisms created to deal with cancer or to help heal you from cancer. Would that be fair enough to say?
Yeah, especially when I've seen the impact. So we go to the clinic in January, and probably 3/4 of the people there, if they're a woman, they have breast cancer. If they're a man, they have prostate cancer. I mean, those are the two most common cancers. So many of my new friends, they had been trying traditional treatments that had been failing them. So they'd had double mastectomies, they'd have their prostate removed, so they had bladder surgery and prostate surgery and chemotherapy or radiation on their back, and it destroyed a vertebrae. So they thought, yeah, enough of this, we're going to try something that'll work with our body rather than against the cancer. So that's where, and it wasn't that I was aware of that before, but to be sitting in an IV room with someone, that telling their story, and you can see in their eyes, how they wish they had done something differently, but they just did what their doctor said. This was traditional oncology. This is what everyone else is doing, but it wasn't working. It was failing them miserably. So that's when it really hurts. And then having come home, and some of the people that I got very close to there have since died. Whether you choose traditional or alternative, there's no silver bullet. The chance that cancer is, it's a wily, strong disease, and it can take you out. But often when you start with traditional treatments, your body's weakened. It makes it more difficult for the natural treatments that you're using or your food to really heal you. So that's where it's heartbreaking. And then when you start realizing the reasons for it, that the pharmaceutical industry, and I have good friends that work in the pharmaceutical industry, and if it wasn't for the modern medical world, I probably would have died, years ago when I had a knee injury. I mean, if you break something, if you're in a car accident, I mean, it's just the marvels of modern medicine, the scanning machines that, have allowed me to know what's going on inside of my body. But the system is designed where it's focused on treatment, because that's where they can do what they call, double-blind placebo tests. They can do their scientific protocol to come up with what works and what doesn't work based on treating the symptoms. That's what allopathic medicine is. It's treating symptoms. So 95% of all money is spent on therapies related to treatment, but only 5% on prevention and cure. And the main reason is that can't be monetized. You can take a drug, you can monetize that, but you can't monetize broccoli, very easily. I mean, you can make a little markup at the grocery store.
Well, what are some of the things that you learned through the treatment? One, in the sense of areas that you've changed about yourself, because I know you've had a drastic change of a diet, for sure. I know that you mentioned about exercise, about heat. So what are some of the areas that you've learned about yourself there? And also, what are the things that you want to see changed for people out there?
A big thing that we learned is the integrative way in which our body works. We're mind, body, soul, spirit, however you want to break that down. But we're more than just a biomechanism. And our soul, our spirituality, our mind, all of those things work together to make us healthy. So I think for me to learn that, especially for prostate cancer, people with that diagnosis, that stress often is a core that naturopaths will look at. What's stressing you? When we were in Mexico, I met with a therapist, and she did like an intense life mapping. She went through like every decade of my life, asking what went on, what happened, why, to look at what type of trauma, what type of issues I might be holding and carrying. Because when you're under stress creates anxiety. It releases cortisols into your body. And in the fast movement of our culture, we become very used to being under stress and thinking that's normal and kind of the frog in the kettle. Everyone's that way. But we're starting to see, a rise in cancer. Cancer, many believe will overcome heart disease as the number one chronic disease in America. It's starting to shift to a younger population. I mean, we were in Mexico. There were women, Samantha, who just died 3 months ago. She had 7 kids. One was 1 year old. The clinic said they've been noticing over the last decade, it keeps getting younger and younger. So there's things in our lifestyle and certainly things in our environment that are increasing people getting cancer. So I'm not sure I'm quite answering your question. Maybe direct me where you...
No, you are. It's,
okay.
So you're saying things in our lifestyle such as what?
Well, unmanaged stress, overworking. Yeah. There's lack of exercise. I mean, right now, obesity, 2/3 of people in America are either overweight or obese. And they're finding now how much obesity is linked to cancer. I mean, it's been kind of known that being overweight or obese is directly linked to type 2 diabetes. But now they're seeing that it actually affects your immune system, where immune cells, natural killer cells, actually get fatty and sluggish. And so the lifestyle of how we eat and exercise can be everything related to a diagnosis. But that's what's interesting, that when we were with the oncologist, he never talked about any of those things. He just said, well, just tell me what treatment protocol you want, but never asking, well, tell me about your lifestyle. Tell me about where you live. I mean, we're just in Iowa right now. They're finding that during all this nuclear testing back in the 40s and 50s, people are living in that area. It's gotten into the water, and they've seen a big rise in cancers. I mean, it's things in our environment. The glyphosates, I guess it's called, that are in like Roundup and what's put on our lawns, or certainly the pesticides put on our food, can have a tremendous sense putting oxidative stress on us. So, yeah, there's just a lot of things related to our lifestyle that can impact disease, many types of chronic disease.
What have you learned about your perception of life through this journey? Because it's been a year-long change for you. Mm-hmm. And we spoke obviously during that. We've always been open-minded. We had these amazing discussions this time last year. But what has changed for you in terms of your perspectives about life?
Yeah, going back to what I said earlier, when you are given an expiration date, because of course we all know that someday we're going to die. And when I was 58, 8 years ago, I went through like this fairly deep existential crisis, really embracing the fact that I was an older adult. When you're almost 60, you can't say you're middle aged anymore. Now, you are an older adult. So for me to really start to parse through what's important to me, and to be challenged with this notion of love. And in fact, I did an experiment. It was, I think, like 3 or 4 weeks after my diagnosis. I was thinking about this idea of love, and that people that I knew that I loved. And, it's one of those terms we use it. I love my car, I love my wife, I love my food. So sometimes it's a throwaway term, but I really tried to, I took a specific re-examination of that word and how I use it. And I started to tell people that I loved them. And not say, love you, or we love you, but to look them in the eye and say, Raj, I love you.
Yeah.
And to see people's response. I did it personally. I did it in emails and text messages. And it was interesting, the response I got from people. In fact, I wrote a whole thing about that I posted on Facebook. I started a blog. I probably have about 30 posts of different things that I've written over the last year. Well, not even a year now, about 8 or 9 months. But just to realize that that's why we exist, is to love each other, to love ourselves, and to love God, to love the divine creator, however we would understand him or her. So that was such a deep epiphany, and to stay in that groove of understanding how precious we are as individuals and how precious those that we love are, and to make sure they know that. And to give other people permission, because I've had people kind of joke, say, well, and then they'll say, I love you back. And then I've had this one friend, and she told me that opened up something in me to just feel comfortable, because sometimes, especially with men and women that aren't our spouses, to say I love you could be misinterpreted.
Yeah.
And it certainly could be. But I guess I would rather be on the side of erring on the side of being a little too demonstrative or too loving than to be holding back. Because I think right now as a culture, we're holding back love. We're afraid to love. We're afraid to open up and truly be vulnerable with people.
And what do you think is the danger for that?
The danger of being too open?
Not being open enough. In withholding, holding back.
Yeah.
From everything that you've learnt so far, do you feel that there's any dangers included in that?
Yeah, I feel that there's a flow that goes on in healing. And love is what opens the valve for that flow of healing. And I feel that we can romanticize love and make it sweet, and it's about, a fun movie, a fun Hallmark movie that's cheesy. But love is really the essence of life, and it's the essence of what brings us together as humanity. And I feel like as a filmmaker, I'm continually drawn to projects that are related to the brotherhood of man. And we're just finishing up a documentary right now on William Penn. He was a 17th and 18th century person. He founded our state. He was from the UK. Some people may know of him in the UK, but not too many, as we found out, even though he only lived here in the States for 4 years. But he talked about brotherly love. And he came here, and he had deep respect for the First Nations people here and saw them as brothers, even though they believed totally different than he did. And being a Quaker, Quakers believe that the light of God is within all people. And most Christians don't believe that. They see us and them. Well, we're saved, they're unsaved. We're at the very deepest of who we are, we're opposed of God, where the Quaker would say, no, the very deepest of who you are is of God. And when you look around and you think even your enemy is of God, that starts to change everything. And I feel like what's going on in Ukraine right now, we see, this war in Europe, which we haven't seen in 40, 50 years. And it's affecting us globally. And it's, again, a breakdown of love and understanding, and how important it is to embrace loving even our enemies. So we would reach out and seek ways to negotiate rather than fight wars. William Penn, again, in 1693, he wrote a whole essay envisioning the Parliament of Nations, because there was so much war, the 30 Years' War, that had just finished as he was right when he was born, that virtually shut down Europe. 8 million soldiers died, not to mention the number of civilians. And he just couldn't believe this was happening with people that would profess to be following God. They could be killing each other at the same time. Yeah. And I feel like that's a chronic disease. That's a cancer in our community, in our world. And I feel like, just as I was told that love would heal me of my disease, I feel like love is the key to healing our world. I feel like for both my wife and I, we've been given a gift. Like my sister said in the very beginning, she said, David, you've been given a gift. And it's hard to look at a cancer diagnosis as a gift. But it's changed for the better so many things about my life. And just the people that I've met that I would have never met without this diagnosis, and the way that I can relate to not only them, but other cancer survivors, has opened up a world that I can't imagine ever being cut off from, or can't imagine ever not being introduced to.
Yeah.
Which is part of really being mindful, is just embracing things as they are rather than living in this life of resistance. And that some things that are perceived as gifts turned out not to be. And some of the worst things that have happened. And some of the things that we think are the worst things that could ever happen end up being a gift.
Yeah.
And so I feel like of anything that I would want to pass on to someone, and I feel like I have some collateral or coinage to use to be able to say that you can look at something like a life-threatening disease and see it as a gift.
Yeah. And
see good in there and see opportunity for you to grow as a person, but also as a communicator and a storyteller, how can we take what we're learning and pass that on to other people? And we feel like as soon as this happened, Kathy and I said, well, let's start documenting things, So we were just doing selfie videos and telling stories. And one time I tried fasting for 3 days and I was so sick I couldn't get out of bed. So I have the camera in bed talking about how wretched I feel. In my friend's, sauna, talking. And it was just the first 2 months, it was just like my brain was just on fire with ideas and feelings. I mean, I would cry probably 4 or 5 times. Anything would make me cry. Any sense, watching American Idol or something, and some story that might be touching, I would just be like, tears would just be flowing. I'd see my grandkids and I would cry. And there was something so beautiful about that, because I hadn't felt anything quite like that, and I don't know if I ever have remembered feeling anything like that. So being able to take what we're learning, what we're experiencing, and then tell stories about it, we feel so empowered about that. And so we started just doing some of our own selfie videos and thinking, just kind of in the back of our mind how we might do something, but we were so focused on everything else, we didn't take time to really plan it. Well, about, I don't know, maybe not even a month after our diagnosis, the distribution company we worked for called Bill Curtis, the president. And he again expressed, concern, and he wanted to pray for us. And he said, Dave, I don't want to pressure you, but would you think about the possibility of doing a documentary about your story, and we'll fund it? So I was like, yes, and we've already started. So of course he was happy to hear that we'd already come up with that, and it wasn't going to be an imposition. And what was interesting to find out, and I knew this, his dad in 2011 had died of cancer. He had colon cancer. In 2004, he was diagnosed. He lived 8 more years. He tried traditional therapy. It didn't work. He tried unconventional, non-toxic therapies. He also went to Mexico. But that was really early on in a lot of just emerging of more knowledge about these therapies. So he was going to make a film, but he died before he could do it. That's all his research. I'm pointing to a box on the floor. So we probably 4 or 5 months ago, we got together with the distributor, with Bill, and he said, well, here's all my dad's stuff. And if you look through it, I mean, it's like well-researched, written out articles, his thoughts. He did a journal for months that he wrote his thoughts like every day. So it was like we're fulfilling a dream of someone that I had. I didn't know his dad real long, but the little time I got to know him, I had just deep respect for him. And our distributor, we have a very close relationship, and we've done numerous projects for them. So it just seems like it was meant to be. And we feel like the serendipity and the beauty of us being able to take this pile of information and interpret it into our story and into a story that, some of our films, 400,000 or 500,000 people have watched, so we feel like this story and what's happening with cancer. I mean, virtually anyone you talk to has a family member, a close friend. I mean, it's around us, it's here. So we feel like we can create something that hopefully, again, if it just helped a few people, it would be well worth it. But we feel like there's just so many pebbles now being thrown in the pond as it relates to alternative therapies. More and more people are trying it. I think COVID kind of blew the lid off of the idea that maybe you wouldn't have to do what was being recommended and it was okay. There's a lot of resistance being told, well, this is the only way to think about something. I know as soon as you put big business, big pharma, big tech, big government, everyone's saying there's only one narrative. Yeah. I think we have a responsibility to be skeptical of that. Not cynical or angry, but just to be, have a healthy skepticism. And I feel like that's growing. People are starting to see that there's alternative therapies. And I think in the next 20 or 30 years, in my lifetime, we're going to see a lot of change. And I've already, from what I'm reading and hearing, that the reimbursements are changing, where insurance companies are starting to see that these alternative therapies are cheaper and work better. Big pharma isn't going to change how they're working and how they're funding, but the insurance companies they want to, obviously, their bottom line is as important as the pharmaceuticals. Pharmaceuticals is all about making money from their products. Reimbursement's all about how little they should pay. And so they're going to look at the most inexpensive and viable technique. So, I feel like as that relates to Kathy and I feel like we all have stories to tell, and we all have things that we've learned. And you may not be a filmmaker, but I know you're a podcaster and a journalist, and have had, you've reached tens of thousands of people, maybe hundreds of thousands of people. But everyone has an audience, even if it's just one, of people that are watching you and watching how you live and watching how you approach your issues and your problems or your art. I know so many. I have a friend, and he's retired, and he was kind of a repressed artist his whole life, and now he's drawing, and it's like changing him. It's giving him purpose, and the people he's meeting, and just being able to. He was a futurist for General Motors, so he was always thinking, what was in the next 20 years. And have photographic memory, just a brilliant man. And now he likes to go down to Philadelphia and paint buildings, and think about light and how it's hitting the shading and the coloring. And it's just been a beautiful transition for him. So we all have something to offer each other. And I think as we love ourselves and dig deep inside and find out who we are, then we can have authentic relationships with other people.
And I think what you mentioned earlier, it's readjusting the filter in which we experience life. I think once we readjust it to that degree that we feel truly comfortable, the body's own healing mechanisms kick in. Your thought process, like the Zoroastrian saying, be careful of your thoughts will lead to your words lead to your action to the result. It's the same type of thing. Your thought process changes because you almost get to experience the world as it is, rather than how you are or how you thought you should be. And that's when you start to truly live. And everything has vibrancy then. The colors are a lot more mystical. Everything is there. And then, you've lived a life that is worthwhile living. And you said that the therapist asked you a question at the beginning, have you got something to live for? What are you living for? But I'm guessing along those questions, there's probably another question that she asked you that uncovered a lot more introspective thought to say not just purpose, but the connection between how the body feels and how the mind's thoughts are processed. Do you remember any of those questions that she would have asked?
Well, just in general, the really coming face to face with how integrated we are. And that, whether psychological, physical, emotional, our gut, even our mouth. I mean, that was one of the first things that at both clinics, what's going on in your mouth? Do you have mercury fillings? Do you have a root canal tooth that might be bad? So getting these toxins out of your body. And so I found out that I had a root canal tooth. I had one, and sure enough, it was infected, and they pulled it out. And they're finding a connection between the same bacteria in root canal teeth than in people's cancer. So this integration, and even now there's a whole movement of biological dentists now, where they're starting to understand that they're not just working on teeth; they're working on the whole person. So I think that's what I got out of the counseling, is that it's all integrated. It's all one. And so I'm not going just to get my head fixed and get my thinking right, but getting my thinking right is going to affect the whole of who I am. Because thoughts are things, and we can buy into our thoughts. In fact, that's just, both my wife and I have been doing a lot of reading about this whole idea of, in fact, I have something I heard recently that I've been using. When something comes in that it's not good for me to dwell on, I realize it and I release it. It's just, okay, that's what it is, let it go, rather than just choosing to dwell on it and let it fester and let it do exactly what I don't want it to do, and it create stress, create cortisol. And I feel like there's, when I was there, in fact, I did an acupuncture therapy. The last therapy, I was with this therapist. She also does acupuncture. So she laid me down. I hadn't done a whole lot of that, but she put a bunch of, the needles in and hit certain meridians, and then talked about why they were potentially hurting so much. And then she had me listen to this meditation for about 20 minutes. And I was familiar with the person that she had me listen to, so it made it even more meaningful. And then when she pulled them out, and I sat up, it was like this emotion just like poured out of me. It was like whatever she had put in my body was just being released. And this probably wouldn't happen in the US, but she just wrapped her arms around me and just held me. And I just sobbed. And I feel like, whether it be physically or emotionally, spiritually, we kind of all need that kind of release where someone's going to hold us spiritually and physically and emotionally, and just let all of life come out in a deep, pent-up emotion that we tend to hang on to. And I think men especially, I feel like there's a movement now toward men being able to grieve, but I even heard my son-in-law say recently in front of my grandson, because my grandson cries all the time. He's 6, and just everything makes him cry. And he said, "Well, Dad, do you ever cry?" And "I've never seen you cry, Dad." And Jeff said, "Well, I hope you never do." And I wanted to say something, but I hope my grandkids I know have seen me cry. My kids have seen me cry. And I think we need to see more of that, because for men, it's a sign of weakness. For women, it's a sign that you're hysterical and can't control your emotions. But I think that needs to change.
Global Indian Network. Print, TV, events, podcasts. Find out more at globalindianseries.com.